Hello, once again, and welcome to Herd Immunity News. I'm Marcus Botzer. Today, we have the great pleasure in welcoming back the leader of the Heritage Party, Mr. David Kurten. David is very active and he's to be found on multiple channels, but in particular, his own YouTube channel and indeed GB News. He really is one of the stalwart voices on GB News. But without further ado, let me say, Mr. David Kurten, how are you, sir?
Thank you for having me on. Yes, I'm doing well. Thanks very much. I mean, yeah, it's been a nice few days over Christmas, but there's still so much to do. There's so much going on all of the time. So, I'm fine in myself, but I just feel for other people who are not well, because of the things that are going on. We live in an absolutely crazy world, and people should just be allowed to be left to get on with their own lives, but that isn't the case anymore. Whether you live here in the UK or some other countries. I mean, life is not easy for a lot of people. So, all I can do is speak out on things that I see and try to provide a vehicle for change, which is the Heritage Party. We want to stand in the elections, local elections, national elections, to put things right again. So, that's all I can do. And I try to do that to the best of my ability. So, thanks for having me on. And it'll be good to chat to you.
Yeah, I mean, we are very fortunate to have you on, and when we do recommend people who haven't done so already, and we know you're reaching new numbers and figures all the time with your Twitter page, with your social media platform and YouTube, and also with the Heritage Party. More and more people are looking for an answer because the uni-party situation we have right now with the Conservatives and Labour are just not cutting it for most people. They can see that there's not much between them. But let me bring us on to our first subject. And my first question to you, please, David, and that's on immigration. Now, one can argue that the Brexit vote was largely due to national sovereignty and immigration to control our borders. Same can be said for the 2019 general election. On Rishi Sunak, the placed minister, or the prime minister, some people call him, were the Bibi Stockholm projects and the Rwanda plan little more than a decoy for his true goals, which was 750,000 net migration for the UK?
Yeah, well, both of those things were never going anywhere. They're just propaganda exercises. I mean, the Bibi Stockholm has 500 people max on it. You get that number coming over in one day because they're not controlling our borders, our southern border across the English Channel. The Rwanda scheme, they first proposed that in April 2022, just before the local elections of that year. And I think it was mainly a propaganda exercise to try to stop their vote from collapsing at that time, which it didn't work. But again, not a single person has gone to Rwanda. Even if they do start sending people to Rwanda, it's not a deportation scheme. It's an exchange scheme. We send migrants to Rwanda. Rwanda sends migrants back to us. So we're not going to end up with any fewer people. I mean, it's not going to work anyway. The only beneficiaries of that are the Rwandan government, who have so far got 120 million pounds for absolutely nothing. So it's just a sham, absolutely. It's a farce. It's worse than a farce. It's a waste of our money, and they're not doing anything. What they need to do is push the boats back to France to stop illegal immigration. But, this is another point, is that the illegal immigration is only a tiny fraction of the whole issue, because this government has put in scheme after scheme after scheme to bring more people to the country legally. The number of student visas as balloons, the number of work visas as mushrooms, the number of people that we're taking as asylum seekers or refugees through safe and legal routes is also balloons. We got 200,000 plus people from Ukraine, because this government has pursued a war which they didn't need to pursue, which is a whole other issue, but it all links in, you see. So they're just a disaster. Labour would be no better. Lib Dems and Greens support it as well. So it's the whole Uniparty are ruining this country in multiple ways, and mass immigration is another way, just one of the ways that they're ruining this country. It has to stop.
Absolutely, David. It's all true. And it is a motivator because people can see it on their doorstep. And this isn't about racism. This isn't about being anti-migrant. The whole point of Brexit was, of course, to control our own borders and to have a say over who comes in and how many and when. Because on the current trajectory, you're looking at possibly 1 million people net migration every single year, and we just do not have the capacity. Is it fair to say that mass migration is costing lives?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly we don't have the infrastructure to cope with it. You know, with 745,000 net coming into the country in the last 12 months. You know, 1.2 million gross. You know, some people have gone back to make the net figure. But yeah, I mean, indirectly, it may be costing lives because we just simply don't have the houses being built for people to live in. We don't have the GP surgeries and appointments. We don't have the hospital space for people who need it. We don't have the classroom space for the children who are coming over. We don't have, you know, we're not building new roads and new railways. So, you know, getting on trains, driving on the roads these days, people see how much more congested it is. And this is because of a massive increase in the population. I mean, it's anything a child can tell you. You put more people into a certain area, but you don't increase the amount of infrastructure you've got. The infrastructure is going to become strained.
Two quick statistics: 8 million on the NHS waiting list, 400,000 on the classified as homeless.
Yes. Yeah, so absolutely.
The lower, sorry, David, but the lower one's quality of life, if this is the trade-off, the lower your life expectancy. And that's a fact.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I mean, those are two key areas where it maybe is costing lives. I mean, you don't know each individual person directly, but as a whole, obviously the waiting lists have just gone bigger and bigger and bigger. And, you know, people are not getting operations that they need. We know people are dying of cancer and so on because, you know, it takes months or to see a cancer specialist. People are not getting knee operations and so on that they need. I mean, it's also been exacerbated by lockdowns, of course, as well, and the sort of, you know, focus on COVID over everything else. But these two things have gone together to cause the problem. And yeah, with homelessness, there shouldn't be any homelessness in this country because we should have enough council homes for people to have, for British people to have and be accommodated in if they fall upon hard times. And they don't have to be luxury homes, but just, you know, a flat or something. But, you know, there simply aren't any left. They're giving them to migrants as the first choice. And then you see often British people want a council home in their own area with their own local authority. They can't get one for, you know, a decade or so. So they end up on the streets in some cases. And so, yes, to answer your original question, thinking of it like that, it is costing lives.
I mean, Priti Patel and Robert Jenrick, so that's the former Home Secretary and the former outgoing Immigration Minister, have both been thrown under the bus by Rishi Sunak. But Sunak seems to either be complicit in this globalist agenda to overpopulate one's country, or he's working with the Home Office, who seem to be in control of the country and be hell-bent on mass migration.
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, you know what Rishi Sunak is doing? He stands in front of a panel that says stop the boats, as though he's some kind of activist. I mean, this is just bizarre. I mean, he's in charge. He's the one who has got to implement the schemes to stop the boats. There's no point in, you know, say being an activist against yourself, you know, telling yourself what to do. He's got to go in and make sure that the boats get stopped. But, you know, I think it's a double whammy because I think you have people in the government, you know, who, like Rishi Sunak, perhaps, who don't actually have any intention of doing anything to stop the boats. They just pay lip service to it. But you've also got you know, thousands of minions in the civil service and their agencies who are completely in favor of mass rapid immigration. Maybe some people who have come over themselves as migrants got themselves jobs as immigration officers, and they just open the door for two people. So you know, we've got to root out those kind of people who are not controlling our borders, who are actually opening our borders and have got themselves into jobs as activists to allow them to do that. I mean, this is a big problem. I've been talking about cultural Marxism for a long time, and how it works is you have activists going into schools, into businesses, into government in order to advance the agenda. Well, you have the same with immigration activists, refugees welcome activists. They don't just stand out, you know, by the port in Dover with a sign saying refugees welcome. What they do is they try to get jobs in the Home Office, in the Border Force, and so on, in order to change those institutions to allow mass immigration. This is a big problem that needs to be sorted out.
Looking at yourself as a leader of the Heritage Party and standing for council, for example, we know you're standing candidates in the general election, and we'll come on to that. But you, with Heritage Party councillors, they have at least a say over, for example, buildings of multiple occupancy. Now, we have this problem in Scotland where it's only, for example, a few Conservative councillors that say, excuse me, we've got 7 or 8 in this area, we can't cope. Is that the type of thing that the Heritage Party, as having councillors, would focus on, is trying to enact some change with local councils?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we want to protect our heritage, and part of that is looking after our towns and cities and buildings and making sure there's not new developments going up where they shouldn't be doing on green fields, and also looking after the homes and the buildings that are there. So certainly, you know, we would stop lovely 3, 4, 5 bedroom family houses being turned into homes of multiple occupancy, which then, you know, who knows what's going to happen to them. This is not what should be happening in our communities. So we have 8 councillors now at town and parish level, which is fantastic. Yeah. They're doing an amazing job, and you know they're coming up all the time against the woke agenda and the climate agenda. You know, so it's a big fight for some of them. They're doing really well. In, you know, actually one of our councillors in Kent was fighting a climate action group that wants to go into the local school with the backing of the parish council and teach children about climate alarmism and how they need to eat less meat and things like this, you know. So we're fighting these kind of things, and you know, being there's a voice for reason and common sense. But you know, the next step for us is to get people actually onto district and borough councils, and we're definitely going to try and do that again in May 2024. You know, we stood 65 candidates last year. We got some, as I said, in town and parish level, but we need to get up to the next level. But also, you know, we want to get into Parliament as well. So we're going to be standing as many people as we possibly can for Parliament. But yeah, these are the things that we need a voice for ordinary people in local government, because it's so important for people's everyday lives. You know, whether it's you wanting your potholes fixed, or whether it's you don't want your park to be built on, or whether you want your library to stay open, you know, whether you want money to go into youth services, or do you want to go into creating a 15-minute city with cameras at the edge of your neighborhood. So we can get councillors in to make those decisions, to spend your money on enhancing your community rather than putting in surveillance and closing down and shutting down your community for the climate agenda. So it's so important people get involved and stand to be councillors and try to make this positive change.
Absolutely. And it seems to be there's a new day, there's something new being eradicated from our heritage and our traditions and our culture. I'll give you an example, if I may. In Scotland, not far from where I stay, we have one of the last remaining steam engine railway stations that actually has an active steam engine. Now, because of the lockdowns and COVID, and in Scotland, it was particularly longer than anywhere else, it seemed. You know, Nicola Sturgeon, the disgraced former First Minister, ensured that the museum itself is now into debt of nearly £375,000. But coincidentally, David, £375 has been gifted by the new First Minister, Mr. Youssef, to a mosque. And the reason for that is to make them aware of climate change.
It's absolute nonsense, isn't it?
Our heritage is being eradicated right in front of our faces. And a big part of this seems to be led by the the Financial Control Authority, who seem to have a relentless zealotry for diversity, inclusion, and equality.
Our own money.
How do you beat this?
Our own money is being used to dismantle our country. You know, our own money is being used to essentially put us into slavery, to make ourselves slaves of this system. You know, and it's appalling, but it can change. All we need is for people to stop voting for these people who are destroying our country and vote for someone who is going to maintain our heritage, like us in the Heritage Party. You know, what better party could there be to maintain our heritage than the Heritage Party? So, you know, the Conservatives aren't conserving anything. The SNP, I mean, they say they care about Scotland, but they're a globalist party. They're destroying the heritage of Scotland and then opening the door to all this diversity agenda, the inclusion agenda, which is not inclusive, actually, because it's exclusive of the majority indigenous population. And all of this wokery, this transgenderism, you know, that's coming in with this, and all the climate agenda, the Agenda 2030, all of these militate against our traditional way of life, our normal way of life, and just ordinary people being able to get on, go about their business, raise their families in peace. They want to destroy families. They want to destroy the nation. They want to destroy freedom. This is our strapline: freedom, family, nation. We stand for maintaining and enhancing these three things, where all the other parties in the uniparty are trying to wreck them. It's a very, very simple choice, and it will end not tomorrow, but it can end in May if you choose to vote for us and stop voting for these parties that are going to ruin your country. You know, I just it's beyond me now how anybody can even think of voting Tory, Labour, Lib Dem, Green, SNP. As you said it, you know, that's just a simple example of them ruining a beautiful piece of Scottish heritage, and then, you know, funding climate awareness in a mosque, which is absolute nonsense.
And this is all pushed by the agenda, isn't it? And if you want to include more of something, then something else has to be put to one side. If you're not in the 7 protected characteristics, I think it is, of the Equality Act 2010, then you're not protected in any way, shape or form whatsoever. Now, I mean, do you resent the fact that someone would put you in a category of, say, for example, BAME? Is that not insulting?
Yeah, I hate these phrases, you know, where people say, you know, I'm David, you know, I'm English, I'm British. I went to university in St Andrews, so I have a connection with Scotland. I love Scotland too. Sure. But you know, I hate it when people classify me as, like, you know, something else. You know, oh, you're not really British, you're BAME, or you're not, you know, you're or coloured or something. You know, brown, mixed
identity
race.
politics.
People don't really know what to say, but you know, just treat me as a person who loves my country. I mean, I hate it. And it's not people, you know, who are conservatives who are doing this. It's all these people, you know, on the cultural Marxist left who are desperate to create these new victim classes. And, you know, they hate me because they think I should, because of the color of my skin, have a victim mentality. But I don't have a victim mentality. You know, I don't want to, I don't want to smash white privilege, because I don't think there is white privilege in this country. Everybody is equal and everybody can get on. I mean, look, the Prime Minister's an Indian, for goodness sake.
Well, look across the board. Look, Varadkar in Republic of Ireland, Sadiq Khan in London, Mr. Youssef in Scotland. I mean, they've got a clean sweep.
Yes.
So this whole point about Britain being, you know, built on its slavery past and everything, people forget history very, very quickly. But can I just bring us on to the next subject, if I may, because we want to get your opinion on so many different subjects in the time we've got. The COVID inquiry. Is it little more than a farce, a vanity project, something that's been tailorized and redacted to such a small point of view or term of reference that it's not even worth our time having it?
I think it's worse than a farce. I mean, I did debate this at one point on GB News, and it was like going back to 2020 all over again, and like going through the arguments that people were putting forward and back there about, oh, the lockdowns are good, the lockdowns are bad. I was, Sweden is better off than us, and this is all that they were talking about. But the COVID inquiry itself, it's not looking at why lockdowns were bad and the damage that has been done to the economy and to people's lives and how many people have died from it, and then going on to the injections and looking at that and how various people knew that they were not safe and not effective, but they were rolled out anyway. It's not even looking at that. The whole focus of this seems to be, how could we have prevented more deaths by locking down harder, faster, longer, sooner, more strictly, and that's the focus and that of the investigation. It seems that's what's going to come out in the report. It's completely the opposite of what needs to be done and what needs to be discussed. They need to discuss how they should have stuck to the plan they had for an emergency, which was to try to keep life going as normally as possible and keep the economy going and cause as little disruption as possible. And certainly, they should be looking at who's to blame for the excess deaths that we now have that are increasing month on month from these injections. But that's not being spoken about at all.
No, and when Hugo Keith, the King's Counsel for the COVID inquiry, when he shut Michael Gove down, when Gove, who was really running the cabinet and the SAGE meetings at the time, the emergency meetings, because Boris couldn't cope with the figures, allegedly, he was shut down. Keith shut down someone like Michael Gove trying to respond to say, we wanted to find out where the virus came from. Now, when you've got an inquiry that isn't even interested in the virus itself or the damage it's done,
right,
it's beyond an insult. It's basically showing that the government were complicit in any damage that was done subsequently.
Right, and then this is all part of the program, isn't it? This all seems to be how they're working together to, divert people away from what was actually happening. I mean, it's fundamental, isn't it? What was there a virus? What was the virus? Where did it come from? What actually is it? I mean, you need to understand exactly what it is, what you were dealing with, and where it came from. Was it man-made? Was it a bioweapon? Was it an accident? Was there no virus at all? I mean, the statistics, you look at them, there's evidence that would suggest, flu went down for 1 year, and then COVID went up for 1 year by exactly the same amount that flu went down. So, I mean, that is actually a piece of evidence that would suggest there wasn't COVID at all. It didn't actually exist. This is something that needs to be looked into, discussed, investigated, and thrashed out, and not people ignoring it or suggesting that if you even ask the question, you're a conspiracy theorist. I'm just looking at the numbers and saying, well, look, this is very strange, and this is a potential conclusion based on those figures.
It's unbelievable, really, and really, we can't tip our hat to you, David, enough and as many times, because you were the loudest and clearest voice of any political party leader. Subsequently, there's another party leader got in touch with me of a smaller party who said he was saying things, but all respect to him as well. But to your point of view, you were really front and center saying, I've got grave concerns about lockdowns, they shouldn't be happening, and about trial medications for all as a one size fit. And you've been proven correct.
Thank you. I mean, I could just see that this was a media manipulation happening. I mean, when there's a narrative flip on one day and everyone from both sides of the political spectrum in this country and the mainstream media, and also in nations across the world, almost on the same day, suddenly start ramping up fear about something and going against what makes normal scientific sense, there's something wrong. And I could see that with the lockdowns. It was about March the 6th. Up until then, they've been playing it down, and suddenly they started ramping up fear, just like that. And then with the injections, when they were coming in, Suddenly everyone was saying, if you don't take them, you're a granny killer, you're killing other people, you're irresponsible, you're a COVID idiot, you're a vaccine refusenik, you should have your rights taken away from you, you should be shut up, you should be quarantined, you should be jailed, horrendous stuff. And it goes against all basic scientific knowledge that we have. I mean, I now question vaccines in total, but I mean, even if you accept that vaccines are some vaccines are actually safe and effective, you don't put a new experimental medication on the market and inject 50 million people with it when you've only done 3 months of trial. You need 10 years of trials to ensure their safety. This was done with after thalidomide. We know you just don't do this, and they did it anyway. And I just say, the mind blows my mind that everyone could just totally go against all established science, all established safety protocols to roll out this thing, which they didn't know was going to work or not. And then you bring in mass media propaganda to suggest that if you didn't agree with this fake science, that you were somehow, a lunatic. I mean, I could just see it. And, sorry, I just can't keep quiet on things like that. I have to speak out.
And you've spoken out when a lot of people said nothing. And there are other parties out there that are now trying to rewrite history. We won't name them, but we have taken some of the leadership to task on the stance that they took. And we were all called conspiracy theorists. We were called granny killers, vaccine deniers, anti-vax. I remember Johnson threw around. But we said, no, forget the smears. We're talking specifically about this vaccine. We're talking about your trial medication. They were going on television. I remember Joe Biden read his lines out. And he was one of the famous ones to promise people that if they got the vaccine, they couldn't pass it on. When even the manufacturers were saying that it wouldn't stop transmission nor infection. There was people like that idiot Hillary Jones on GMTV. I can't stomach the man. There was someone else went on, a female GP went on Good Morning or something like that. The old Philip Schofield, Holly Willoughby.
Andrew Neil, it's time for...
And Piers Morgan. They all attacked people that weren't taking the vaccine. Now, where are they now? They should be hanging their heads in shame. But you were true to your cause. And on GB News, you've been attacked for this, but you've been proven correct.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I did, and hopefully I've helped some people not to take it who would be ill or dying today from the bad effects of this vaccine. And I spoke about it and asked questions in the London Assembly. Well, the one time the then vaccine minister, Nadeem Zahawi, came to the London Assembly, they didn't want me to speak. They moved on. They didn't even give me my question. So I had to interrupt at the end of the meeting, which is very embarrassing, and put my question. And then, everyone cut me off and, was indicating I was a conspiracy theorist. And, so they didn't like my question. But, I'm just speaking on behalf of the people and just speaking for science. And gosh, so it's just obvious to me that there was something wrong here, and you have to take courage and speak out. And the more I go on, the more I realize you have to speak out immediately, because if you don't, the damage is done. There's such a propaganda exercise to coerce you and control you into not speaking out, because there's so much smearage coming at you to try to shut people up. But you have to speak out immediately. The more I go on, the more I realize this. So we had lockdowns, we've had the COVID, the injections. Then there's the Ukraine situation, and then now this year we've got the Israel-Gaza situation. Every time there's been so much overwhelming propaganda to get everybody to go along with the mainstream line. But I'm just thinking now, you see something, you've got to say it, and you will be vindicated eventually.
You will be. And before we get onto those subjects of Ukraine and Palestine, which we definitely will talk about, we want your expert opinion on. What you were just saying to me there made me think of the relationship between church and state. Now, during the COVID era, all the churches were shut down. People couldn't go and worship. They couldn't even sing when they were allowed into worship. And they were terrified. They were petrified. We know from the evidence that we've got from the Matt Hancock WhatsApp revelations from Isabella Oakeshott, the journalist for Talk TV, that there was a regiment called the 77th Brigade, which were pushing the narrative, pushing the propaganda, and terrifying people. Looking at religion and looking at the Archbishop of Canterbury, sorry to raise that name up with you, it does somewhat hurt my back teeth.
Yeah.
But isn't it astonishing to you that the levels, not just on the vaccines that they push, the lockdowns, net zero, that they're pushing same-sex marriages, they seem to be obsessed with the sexualization of children and all these narratives. Where is the church going? What's happening?
Well, I would say the Church of England is apostate. I don't go there anymore. And it pains me because there's all these beautiful old church buildings. It has a wonderful history of great people, Archbishop Cranmer, John and Charles Wesley and so on. Or they left, I think, and set up the Methodist Church. But they started in the Church of England, and now look at it today. It is pushing everything that is anti-Christian and even anti-science, with these lockdowns, injections, wokery, transgenderism, blessing same-sex marriages, whatever you think about that. It's against scripture. It's against Christian orthodoxy. Marriage is a man and a woman. But the Church of England has been taken over by what I would say are cultural Marxists who are pushing the cultural Marxist agenda, the woke agenda, the green agenda, the lockdown agenda. Who knows? They'll be advocating for CBDCs next. Who knows? They'll be saying, "Oh, if Jesus was alive today, he'd have a CBDC wallet," just like they said, "Oh, if Jesus was alive, he'd have an injection." No, he wouldn't. This is absolute nonsense. They wouldn't. Jesus wouldn't close down the churches so that you couldn't go to church.
He'd be going to Davos every year if he was alive. Yeah.
They say this kind of nonsense, but it's dreadful. I mean, I'm a Christian, and it was very, very hard to find a church which has either not been affected by the woke agenda or the lockdown agenda or other things.
Net zero.
That's net zero climate agenda, and is pushing all of these things, and it actually feels like going to a Labour Party constituency meeting rather than a church. So unfortunately, I have found one now. It's taken a long time that I've found a church I'm happy with. Yeah,
that's a blessing. But like when I was attending church, I'm like you. I find it very difficult, and I've not walked out, but I've really left them because they were up in Scotland. They go on about the net zero. They're obsessed with net zero, and not far from where I stay, they're shutting down the last remaining oil refinery in the country. But in looking at the wars, the Ukraine war was mentioned every single service without mentioning the Russians once or anyone else, or what it was taking, the sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of men for these wars. Now, on Ukraine, before we get on to the next thing, which is the Palestine-Israel conflict, where do you see Ukraine going? Because it's not getting much airtime now that there's a war somewhere else. Where do you see this ending up and when?
Yeah, it's winding down now. I mean, it's stuck in the trenches, essentially. There's a new front line, which Russia is slowly pushing ahead in the front line, to try and take over the whole of the Donetsk Oblast, to stop the city of Donetsk being, in danger from the shelling from Ukrainian neo-Nazi brigades and so on, like it has been since 2014. But I said from the beginning, we didn't need to have this war. We should all have sat down round the table, stuck to the Minsk agreements, and ended the war, stopped it before it even began. But obviously the powers that be in the West wanted to bring Ukraine into NATO. They wanted to bring it into the EU. That was why there was the coup in 2014 that got rid of Yanukovych, put in Poroshenko. Then you got got Zelensky, who was elected on a platform of peace, but he did a massive bait and switch because he was a Western deep state puppet. And then, he advocated for war and pushed for war. Then there were agreements to stop the war after 2 months, but then Boris Johnson went to Zelensky, and the next thing you know, after they had a chat, Zelensky, pulled out of the peace agreements and carried it on. And it hasn't been good for Ukraine. And the people who have suffered the most are the ordinary Ukrainian people. I mean, 500,000 of them have been sent to the front line. Hundreds of thousands are dead, of poor Ukrainian men who didn't want this. Some of them have been press ganged into going to the front lines. Now they're calling up grandfathers to go, who's, right. They just can't fight against the Russian army. But, I always from the beginning thought this doesn't need to happen. There's these autonomous regions in the east of Ukraine, Luhansk and Donetsk, where there are almost all Russians, ethnic Russians. Just let them be. Yeah. Stop bombing them. Stop shelling them. The Ukrainian security forces had done that for 8 years and killed 14,000 Russians. Yeah. So Putin was just going in to stop that. He hasn't gone further than eastern Ukraine, and now all the weapons we've sent to Ukraine, all the money we've sent to Ukraine hasn't made any difference to, the aims of people in the West, often who said, well, we want regime change, actually. Yeah. Some people said that. They wanted to get rid of Putin.
Yeah, Tobias Elwood.
Yeah.
People like this, that Ben Wallace. And they're held up in esteem, David, rather than seen as absolute psychopaths.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, that's what they said. The ultimate aim of some people was to do that and then split Russia up into 20 little statelets that the West could control. Putin's not going to have that. The Russians aren't going to have that. They could see that. And they needed to defend themselves against what they see, whether it's true or not, as NATO aggression. That's how they see it. And, you need to understand how people see the world in order to be able to understand what might happen and try to avoid deaths and war if you possibly can. And that's not what happened. And that's not what the leaders of the West did. They did the wrong thing.
Indeed. And you don't see any Ukraine flags flying around anywhere else these
not
days,
so many,
as there was an absolute fever for it, because people have moved on to different flags now. They've moved on to waving either Israeli flags or Palestinian flags. Now, you've been very vocal again in bringing your opinions into this conflict, and you're bringing a different stance. It's no surprise to anybody, to the mainstream, and even to a lot of your a lot of the guests on GB News where you appear.
Right,
you're bringing in a different side to this, and that's on the response of Israel using this narrative that they can defend their borders against killing untold thousands of people. Can you give us your opinion on what's going on in Palestine at the moment, please, or Gaza?
Well, yes, I don't like to talk about the Middle East, and I've studiously avoided talking about it for all the time I've been in politics, because I know people have very, very strong opinions one way or the other, which is very strange to me, because why have people got such strong opinions about Israel and Palestine, whereas they have no opinions about Azerbaijan and Armenia? And there was an ethnic cleansing that happened in Nagorno-Karabakh in September, and no one cares about that. No, people don't have strong opinions about what's happening in Nigeria, but that's just the way it is. And I think the groundwork for this has been laid over many, many decades. So, I've had to speak about it because everyone wants to talk about it, because it is something that's happened. And, what I've said is I'm not on anyone's side. I'm not pro-Israel. I'm not pro-Palestine. I just want a ceasefire so that as few people as possible get killed and lose their homes. And obviously what Hamas did was an act of war. It was horrible. It was dreadful. It shouldn't have been done on the 7th of October. But this is one of the things that I see. When you see something, you need to say it immediately, no matter what people might throw at you. And what was very clear right from the beginning is that the security border on the border of Gaza was left vacant, which is very, very unusual. The most intensely surveilled, monitored security border wall in the world was left open and unattended for 7 hours at the very point that Hamas came through on the 50th year anniversary of the beginning of the Yom Kippur War.
Very strange, David. Very strange.
Very, very strange. And this all happened. So something was going on there that wasn't quite right. Now, again, that's not at all to, minimize the suffering of the people who were killed. Not they were innocent people at the Nova Festival and in the towns and cities in southern Israel. They were victims of something, absolutely horrible. But then what's happened since then is even worse, because you've got collective punishment of 2.2 million people in Gaza. Israel controls their water supply, their electricity supply, the customs, the ports where goods can go in and out. They've bombed hundreds of thousands of homes. And so, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people living in Gaza have lost their homes and have been forced to flee south because they've got no water, no electricity, no home. And 20,000 people killed, at least half of them children. Whatever happened on the 7th of October, this is wrong. And, I've just spoken out against that, and I've called for a ceasefire because I don't want any more children and women and men, innocent people, whatever they are, to be killed.
Exactly. I heard a point someone made the other day, and they said it would be like the British after an attack in London during the 70s and 80s, when the provisional IRA were letting off bombs in London, and some people were killed in Guildford, for example. We remember the Guildford bombings. It would be like us, the British Army, going over and obliterating Belfast in response. It's not excusable under any circumstances what's going on right now, the killing of innocent people. And that's maybe what's made you speak out against it.
Of course, I think we have a unique policy as a party that says we shouldn't get ourselves entangled in foreign conflicts. All we should be doing is trying to work for peace, ceasefire, and minimize the casualties, and try to stop suffering as much as possible. What I find very disturbing is that people who are sort of in our area, our side, if you like, right-wing commentators, have just gone gung-ho for Israel. Israel can do whatever it likes, and it's justified in anything it does, even if it just flattens the whole of Gaza and kills all of them. I'm very disturbed by that. And even among Christians, there are some, what are called Christian Zionists who seem to have support, again, will support Israel, whatever it does, and will not just completely blind to the suffering of the Palestinians at the moment. And, I say, look, 20,000 people have been killed. And they say, well, Israel has to do it. No, they don't. Stop the genocide. Stop the ethnic cleansing. There, I've said it. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, I just
can't believe that.
You're in London, and it's a powder keg of emotion. Every Saturday, we see great numbers of people going out, and they're waving Palestinian flags. Now, in amongst those people will be a whole mixture of ideologies. There will be extreme Islamists, and then there'll be peaceful people that think the right thing to do, like a rainbow flag, like a CND flag, or whatever flags that we've seen, a green flag. They will think this is the right thing to do because they're swept along in this wave of emotion that goes throughout London. Or maybe they're just scared, David. Now, we've heard recently from watching your own channel, which I do avidly recommend to people, that there was actually threats made to the Heritage Party, and there's been sort of overtures. I mean, I don't want you to go in too much detail about this, and I hate to always ask the personal question, but it's something that you broadcast about. Can you give us a little update into that situation about your own security and how that's
Yeah,
going.
I mean, I'm not really personally threatened by this because it was a local issue. I was speaking at a meeting in Devon, in Newton Abbot. There were a lot of Heritage Party members there and other people. It wasn't specifically Heritage Party meeting, but it was, arranged by people in the party to talk about local politics and devolution. And then a few days afterwards, there were all these posters stuck on the window of the cafe where I spoke and around the town with my picture on it, the Heritage Party logo saying the Heritage Party is active in this area. They are fascists. They are, conspiracy theorists, all this other thing. They are not welcome on our streets. Now, obviously, I don't live in Devon. I live, not quite a fair way away from Devon. So I'm not personally threatened unless I go back, and I will be going back, in the new year, to do some campaigning in Devon. So, if I go back, that's a concern. But, my main concern is for the owner of the cafe, who very kindly hosted an open event where we should all have free speech, and the local members who are threatened, obviously, because they seem to be threatening the local members by default by this poster. I mean, it's horrendous that people think that they can put this stuff up and threaten free speech and threaten people's safety. And it's been reported to the police. As far as I know, they haven't made any charges or arrests yet.
Yes.
Although, as far as I know as well, they do have video evidence of who it is. So, I'm not totally up to date with the situation there, but I just think that, it's been Christmas and nothing has sort of moved on in terms of, making a charge, making an arrest. I hope they will do soon, because people who do this, it's a threatening communication, that causes fear, alarm and distress, and genuine fear, alarm and distress. Not the sort of fake things that people say all the time, but this really is a threat which needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, whichever party it is, whether it's Labour, Conservative, Heritage Party, SNP, there is no excuse for these type of threats. And if I've seen opposite political figures out in the street, I've seen them near Holyrood, and the last thing you would want to do is approach them. And there's a time and a place in an arena.
No.
And
the thing is, if this was the far right, saying something against Labour, they'd be on it in a couple of hours. That would have been wrapped up within the day. But here it's weeks later, and we're still waiting for something. I'm not saying that the people who are investigating this, are deliberately doing this. I'm just noting that, if it was the other way around, it probably would have been dealt with a lot quicker.
Well, the two-tier policing is clear for everybody to see, whether it be London, whether it be protests over Brexit during the whole referendum campaign, whether it be the cenotaph was obviously a hotbed with the commemorations on Remembrance Sunday. You could see the tension around London building up, and as it turned out, it was really passed relatively peacefully, and cool heads were maintained. But look, we're coming to the end now. We're coming to the end of the year. And we're looking on to a new year and a new beginning. We've got a massive year politically. We've got the general election, most likely in 2024. Mr. Sunak will have to call it. You've got the London mayoral elections as well in this year. Now, for some reason, Herd Immunity News, we've got a lot of Londoners tune in.
Oh, right.
Which we love. I lived there for many years, and I love the place.
Fantastic.
I love the place. It's great. And I still go back there as often as I possibly can. But London holds the key to so much in this country, financially, our heritage, economically. How do you see Sadiq Khan's tenure going on the back of the whole ULEZ, the corruption, the violence? What's going on in London, and what do you think?
But it's going to be a very interesting election because they've changed the voting rules. So the mayor is now going to be elected on one round of voting only, not two as before. So there is a possibility that he might get voted out this time. With a two-round vote, it is almost certain to get in because the Green and Lib Dem votes will be reallocated to the mayor, to Sadiq Khan. So But now there's only one vote. It's simple first past the post. So there is a possibility that you might get voted out. I probably will not be standing because I don't live in London anymore. I moved away from London to Sussex after the 2021 elections when I stopped being a London Assembly member, unfortunately and sadly. But we will certainly be standing in the London Assembly elections as the Heritage Party. As for the London Mayor elections, we'll see, because I think this is so important. It might be an election where we can work with other people, other parties, just to get rid of Sadiq Khan. I think we all need to come together to have a get rid of Sadiq Khan candidate, because that's important.
I think that's a great idea. Well, Susan Hall, obviously. Susan Hall would be
well, I'm not. She's a conservative. I'm not going to endorse the Conservative Party, but I know Susan Hall.
Yes,
she's a very decent person. I used to sit next to her on the London Assembly. So out of all the Conservatives, she would be the closest to the Heritage Party in terms of what she thinks. I mean, there are still some differences, but she would be the closest. So that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. But there will be a movement, as you correctly say, that will identify it's better to make some compromises just to get Sadiq Khan out of London. Because Sean Bailey, who I'm sure you know, came very close the last time.
Yeah, in the first round, he came close. Yeah,
we're not endorsing the Conservative Party at all on this channel. So we'll make that
no, they're absolutely dreadful. in
and
most
we're not members. We're not members of these parties that we have guests on, like great guests on, like yourself. We have you on because we value your opinions, your views, and we wish the Heritage Party all the best and encourage people to join and get active. And I take it when they join you, they can come along and get involved in events and things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. We have county branches and regional branches, and some places local branches, actually, like Southend. There's a local branch now because there's so many people in Southend who've joined. So you can get involved and join your local branch. Get it. They have social events and there's campaigning events. So when you do join, we put you in touch with local coordinators, and then you can get involved on a local level.
Yeah, all the links, of course, will be left to that. But just a couple of more points before we wrap up. Looking at 2023, which individual stood out for you as someone who you would say perhaps not a hero, but someone who stood out as a voice, who stood out as someone who you really admired the most? I know it's quite a tough one, but is there anybody you can just pick out for us?
Person that immediately comes to mind is American, called Stu Peters, and you may have heard of him, may not have heard of him, but I mean, he's very much like me. He will just speak with courage, without any sort of filter about it. Sees something that's wrong and will just say it, and regardless of what comeback he gets, whether it's on the Middle East, on Ukraine, on lockdowns, on COVID, on injections, all of these things that have come against us over the last 4 years, as well as being, a proper conservative, social conservative, standing up for family values. He really is doing a good job over in America. A lot of people in America know of Alex Jones. I mean, he does some good stuff, but to me, I think Stu Peters has now surpassed Alex Jones in sort of the where he'll go and what he'll speak about. So I very much think he's a good voice for truth.
Yeah, well, a friend of mine, Jim Ferguson, has been on his show a couple of times.
Excellent.
And he speaks very, very highly of him. And I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said it's someone that maybe some of our viewers and listeners may not have heard of, and then go and check out what he's got to say. But is there anything else as a sort of Christmas message of goodwill with all the negativity that goes on, and quite rightly, for some of the subjects we've spoken about, immigration, the COVID inquiry, the lockdowns, foreign wars, cost of lockdown crisis. Is there a sort of a positive Christmas message that you'd like to leave our herd immunity viewers and your own listeners and viewers?
Well, you know, Christmas is amazing because there was a dark world and one person came into the world, Jesus, who is God, but became man. And through what he did in his life, changed everything, you know, when he was alive, after he was alive, and that's reverberated through history, you know. So, I mean, I'm not comparing myself to Jesus, but it's to apply that, there is hope. And, you know, there's 20 different things coming against us as our nation, our people, all at the same time or more. But we can change it together. All we need to do is get involved. And I would just encourage people to get involved in politics this year, even if you've never done it before. This is the year you can make a difference, because this is the year there's going to be the UK elections. It's very interesting because it's going to be alongside the US elections as well, probably for the first time in the same, you know, same year, first time for a long time. So this is going to be an incredibly significant year for politics. If we all get involved, we can get rid of these people who are ruining our nation. And I often hear people say to me, well, you're never going to change politics because it's all the setup. They're all just puppets. They're all controlled by somebody. But the people that want to control them put huge amounts of effort and money into controlling those people, because they know that the political process is still powerful and it still means something and it still has an effect. If we get our people into parliament, into local councils, we can change things, and we can just, all we need to do is basically stop ruining the country, you know, repeal all the things that have been put onto us in the last 40 years and just go back to a place where people can get on with their lives without being interrupted. But we got to take action to make that happen. So please, please do join me in the Heritage Party. Stand, support our candidates, vote, and make the change that we need.
Yep, they're great words. I'll say amen to all of that. And there are maybe 60% of the electorate that don't turn up to vote may well decide that this is the right time, just like Brexit. We saw record numbers, nearly 80% electoral turnout. And with the way the country is at the moment, maybe that'll gee people up enough. But when they see the likes of yourself, and maybe in some small way they watch fringe shows like Herd Immunity News, they know that they can get involved and they can influence change in some way, that they feel that they're participating, perhaps, rather than just screaming at the TV screen. When they say Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer, Hazmat useless, or any Klaus Schwab, we haven't even mentioned his name, Bill Gates, Joe Biden, you know, when they see all of these characters, at least they can say, well, there's David Kurten. He's on GB News. He's on Talk TV. And life isn't as bad as I thought.
Right.
Well, listen, David, thank you so much again, sir, for coming on to Herd Immunity News. We look forward to having you back on some point in the new year. But God bless you, and we will speak to you again soon, sir.
Thank you.